Semi-often, it seems, I'll be walking through an area, not really actually looking for anything. In this case, I was on my way to another composition I had planned this afternoon. But as I was walking by this area of the wash, there's some sandstone here that's got some water that's kind of trickling down it. It's got some varnish stains on it, which means it's probably been flowing water very frequently at a regular basis, over the years. I wouldn't say it's much of a flow at the moment. It's more like a sheen. It's just kind of shiny, like it's still wet. Although it probably is just imperceptibly flowing water on it. But stuck smack dab in the middle of this is an oak leaf. Perfectly brown oak leaf. I didn't compose this. This was a natural find. I'm not sure that I could have actually got it to stick if I tried the way that it's in there. It's kind of interesting. There's been some breeze blowing through here too. I'm amazed it hasn't flown off while I was trying to set up on it. But it's just one of those little details that captured the corner of my eye as I was walking by, and after you stop and stare at it for a second, it gets hard to leave without trying. It was too fascinating. I thought it was cool. The more I looked at it, the more I kind of liked it. Now the slope is angled opposite of the sun, which is directly above me right here. And I'm angled straight down, trying to match, the angle of the sandstone with my camera and the plane of focus. Aimed at it with my 240 millimeter Nikon f5.6 Nikkor W lens. And I've had to extend my bellows quite a ways, as you can maybe see in the corner of the frame here. I've actually got 2/3 of a stop of bellows extension because I'm near macro level. It's pretty close. And the reason for that is because, of course, I wanted the oak leaf is the whole focus point of this composition. But there is a little pocket in the sandstone that's giving me some trouble. It was a really heavy, dark object on the border of the frame, and I didn't really like that. So by bringing my legs down and getting the camera closer to the subject, I was able to eliminate that. Now, there's a few things going on here that would normally be a technical challenge, maybe even a flaw, depending on how you look at it. One, it's shiny. So it's reflecting anything that's in it. It's kind of a unique challenge because I had to kind of stand to the side a little bit because my reflection was changing the way the composition looks. But there's also specular highlights, from the sun and stuff glimmering across the top of it that I might normally elect to polarize out of there. But I didn't really like that looking through it. I thought it looked actually a little more interesting having it just being glossy looking. But an additional reason I didn't polarize it is because with the shininess, and especially since it's facing directly at blue sky, there's a blue cast in there. Now, normally that reflecting sky color thing is kind of a, detractant. I don't really want that in the image unless it's being used for color contrast or something. And that's kind of what I'm going for here, is I have, I'm counting on the fact I'm going to have a really blue background with a warmer brown tone leaf in the foreground. So it's that color contrast thing again. But it's not all just blues. The sandstone's got some, some color and depth to it too, little red blotches and stuff here and there. So I'm hoping maybe that'll come through a little bit. Now I may have gone a little overkill on it because I decided to shoot one sheet of Velvia 50. And Velvia tends to go pretty bold with colors, so it's possible it may be pretty exaggerated. I debated on shooting a Provia sheet, but I don't know. I'm still kind of mulling that over in my mind as I'm standing here. But the Velvia exposure I just did, it was 3 seconds at f32 and a third. And of course, like I said, 2/3 of a stop of bellows extension is included in that 3 seconds. I had applied quite a bit of movements to this. I elected to use my rear movements. As the Chamonix got a couple screws that you can let loose and the entire back will shift. But there is a little bit of front tilt as well, just me trying to match the lens board to look like it's mostly parallel with my subject here. And then I just use rear movement, so I'm not constantly moving all over. It seemed to work for me. I was able to get something that looked pretty reasonably in focus. Of course, when shooting a subject this close with a large format camera, there's a lot of challenges with depth of field. Thus the reason I stopped down to f32. And you stop your aperture way down, you may be into diffraction territory. I'm okay with that. I don't consider that to be a problem. I want as much depth of field as I can get. And if there is diffraction in this image, it's nothing I'm really worried about that much, to be honest. I'm sure there's a lot of equations out there that'll prove me completely wrong and out of my mind. But the real world application here, I think is totally fine. Looks good on the ground glass, so I went ahead and shot it. Otherwise, I'm pretty impressed with the Chamonix's ability to focus on targets this close. Something I tend to like to do a lot, and it seems like it's handling it pretty well. It's not my longest lens, but it's one that I carry more often. The 240 is usually in the bag and not the 300, so yeah. Glad to see that it's working out well. So I'm going to stay here for a second and stare at this and decide if I want to shoot any more on it or if I just want to boogie on. But in any case, here's at least this exposure, and as always, let me know down in the comments what you think.
Ultimately, I did decide to shoot a Provia exposure. Of the two exposures, the Velvia went just a bit more purple, as opposed to Provia, which retained more of the natural sky color. This one's a bit of a tough call for me, as I usually prefer the additional color and contrast in Velvia, but I hesitate to say that I think I like the Provia better on this one. Judging by the tones of the leaf, I would say that the exposure is spot on, and I don't think the specular highlights and the shininess of the water are too distracting. Sharpness throughout turned out to be more than acceptable, and I think the sheen and shininess, along with the colorful background, is a nice contrast against the neutral and muted leaf. But here's my edit, and as always, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below.
So for once, I've shown up on a composition well in advance. I got my camera set up, I'm framed up, focused up, I even metered it, although that may change. I'm just waiting for the light. So this whole cliffside behind me here in the afternoon eventually catches direct sunlight. And when it does, that's going to reflect a whole bunch of light up here in front of me into this composition that I'm set up on. Now this is a composition I've shot before. A couple years ago, maybe 2, maybe 3 years ago. And I'll link to that down in the description in case you want to see the video I shot from that time. But at the time, the conditions were great. You know, the tree was this beautiful uniform shade of red. And it may actually be going that way this year too. It just looks like I'm here quite a bit earlier. So there's more of a gradient, you know, of color, a range of colors from greenish yellows all the way through the orange and red. But what it is it looks like a dead ponderosa tree, I'm guessing, based off the little bits of remnants of bark that's left. And then up above here, there are some other ponderosas up here. So I imagine that that's what this was at one time. But it's fallen off of this cliff and into a bunch of maple saplings. And that's where the colors are coming from. So it's kind of just like smack dab in the middle of a bunch of saplings and a bunch of color everywhere. Just like an explosion of maple color. Looks pretty good. Now, I'm not really trying to just duplicate my digital shot. I was actually really happy with that one. But the conditions are a little bit different with the different color and stuff, you know. But I thought I'd explore more and try something a little different. So I've been kind of orbiting around this subject, trying different things, different focal lengths, getting closer, getting further away, include this, and, you know, rotate, all kinds of different things. Because I've had nothing but time on my hands sitting here waiting for the light. But what I've settled on here was another vertical comp. I'm shooting with my 180 millimeter Fujinon f5.6 lens. I'm taking more of a side profile of it. You can see where the camera is, you know, shooting kind of this way. And what that does for me is the way that the log is fallen, the ponderosa dead fallen log, it kind of puts it at a little bit of an angle in the frame. It allows me to kind of include some of these branches. There's some really gnarly branches and stuff in there that are really cool looking, and then all this delicate, pretty good looking color. Now, it may not be drastically different than the digital image, but it's something a little bit different. Mix it up just a little bit. Now, I am close enough to my subject. The depth of field is going to be an issue here. So I've stopped it down quite a ways, down to f32. I tend to do that a lot. Now, I was more kind of worried about the color, so I tried to focus on more leaves and try to average my plane of focus along where the leaves are in plane. There may be some things that kind of come in and out of focus, and I think that's okay, because there's just so much going on. It's just so much, it's almost like framing chaos. So there's plenty to look at. I don't think it's going to be a problem. My metered exposure at the moment is 2 seconds for Provia 100F at 100 speed film, f32. I'm debating here as I'm sitting here waiting if I want to try to take a Velvia image too. Probably will. But now this wall behind me is just about fully lit, so I'm going to start paying attention to this camera and see if I can get this exposure taken. My light's probably as good as it's going to get, so I went ahead and fired off a couple exposures. The first one on Provia 100F, like I was saying, that was 2 seconds, f32. And then I did decide to go ahead and do a Velvia exposure. since that's a stop slower film, it was 4 seconds, but then adding for reciprocity failure, that ended up being 5 seconds, f32. Really fortunate as I've been in this canyon waiting for this. The breeze has been really calm. So I haven't had to wait for wind and leaves rustling around or anything. It's been really, really, really calm. So glad for that. Especially with shutter times that are over a second or two. Sometimes, you're in the middle of an exposure and the leaves start moving. But no, it's been super calm. So that's really nice. I have no idea if I'm going to like these frames any better than the digital that I shot a couple years ago. But it doesn't matter. It's fun to use the camera. It's fun to try things and set up. And, sometimes you improve on your previous work. Sometimes you don't. But it's always fun to try. But here's both of those exposures. And as always, let me know what you think down in the comments.
Looking at all 3 exposures side by side, the 2 Velvia images on the left and then the Provia image on the right, I think they all turned out pretty good, and both film stocks handled this scene pretty well. But in the end, it was the Velvia exposures that I preferred the most, with their additional color and contrast. If you look closely at the Velvia image on the left, it may appear to be just a bit warmer and a touch more contrast. And you would be correct, since after turning off the camera, I had decided to go ahead and fire off one more exposure, this time with my Lee Landscape Polarizer, which has a little bit of a warming characteristic to it. I have to say I think that was a good decision, as that ended up being my favorite exposure out of the 3. I was hoping that the curved shape of this branch would contrast nicely with the straight lines in the image, such as this branch in the corner, the diagonal main trunk, and this small juvenile maple tree on the very left edge. Debatable whether or not that actually works or not in application, but that was what was going through my mind at the time. I'm not sure yet if I managed to make any improvement on this image as opposed to the images I've shot of this subject in the past. But the exposures turned out great, and it was a fun scene to wrap up a long trip. But here's my edit, and as always, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below.
Well, I think that's it for me and Zion this year. It's been a fantastic week. I feel like I've been very productive. I hope you've enjoyed these videos. And if you have, you can let me know by hitting that thumbs up button down below. Maybe while you're down there, consider hitting that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date on whatever it is I'm up to next. Take care of yourself. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next adventure.